Hello, everyone, and welcome to Session 4, Workshop 17 of the EdCollab gathering. So you've made it to the final session of this great day, and we're happy that you've chosen to spend your time here with two great presenters, Tammy Mulligan and Clare Landrigan, who have been working together in the field of professional development for the last 23 years. Currently, Clare and Tammy run a private staff development business, Teachers for Teachers. They work with various school systems to implement best practices in the field of literacy and to engage in institutional change through shared leadership. They've written a book entitled Assessment in Perspective, focusing on the reader behind the numbers, and are contributing writers for Choice Literacy and Lead Literacy. And you can visit them online at www.teachersforteacher.net. Okay, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to Clare.
Thanks so much, Ryan. We're so excited to be here today with the EdCollab gathering. We've been learning all day with everyone. First and foremost, we want to thank Chris Lehman. We both are in the profession of professional development, and we know how hard it is to pull something like this off, and we have such admiration for his energy, his vision, and his commitment. So thank you, Chris, for doing this and for allowing us to be a part of it. We also, Ryan, want to thank you. We just met, and you're going to try to help us, and we've been together 23 years, but never in two different locations.
Absolutely.
Trying to stream and have a video, a PowerPoint, and a hover cam. So here we go. And also Emily Tibbetts-Freeman from Technology Standpoint, she troubleshot with us over the last 2 weeks and did more than help us with this. She actually solved a computer program for Tammy at the same time. So thank you, Emily, for hanging in there with us. We also want to give a shout out to Brenda Power of Choice Literacy and Lead Literacy. The videos we use today are shot with Brenda, and she's just magical in the way she brings kids to life. And we don't know how to do this without children's voices. So we want to thank her for that. And to all of you who have stuck with it all day and you are chosen data for your last session. So in the next 45 minutes, we really want to think a little bit about data, and we're really, for us, doing a workshop on data and assessment without feedback, right, Tam? We're always looking for feedback, and we can't see you and we can't hear you. So we know
we don't see your body language.
I know, which for us with feedback and data, it's like kind of a nightmare. But there is a Twitter feed, so we hope we can hear from you and continue to learn together and keep the conversation going. So we've been learning all day together with all of you, and as we sat down to think about the next 45 minutes, there were some big ideas that we felt just kept resonating again and again all morning. The idea of space, we heard in so many sessions, creating, and in fact, Catherine said, guarding space for our students to think, to act, and to find their voice. And that was just so powerful in so many of the sessions that we listened to today. Chris started us off this morning, right, reminding us that we are here and our job and our profession is about humanity, and we need to bring humanity into our classrooms. That some of these conversations might feel hard and we may not feel comfortable, but whether we're comfortable or not, we need to engage in difficult conversations, and that our voices matter, and we need to be engaging our students because their voices matter now. And Catherine reminded us that we are raising future adults. I have all these notes. We didn't plan on looking at notes, but I wrote all day today. And we're raising these future adults, and we want these adults to be the same adults who are like Chris Lehman this morning, who gather all of us and all of us who are here today to be lifelong learners and to be curious and passionate. And we want to raise future adults who act, and who act out of love and out of voice. And so when we think about guarding this space and making sure that there's space in our classrooms for our kids to think and to act and to find their voice, what we want to think about in the next 45 minutes is how that same space is our space to observe and to listen and to question and wonder and to connect with the kids in our classrooms. As students, as readers, and as writers, but first and foremost, as humans, as literate human beings who we're raising to be our future adults.
And when we're in classrooms, we're seeing piles of data and teachers analyzing data and collecting data and piles on teachers' desks of data. And we think it's become a bad word in schools. And in this 45 minutes, we want to try to change people's minds and create a different mindset about data, about how it can be an opportunity to solve problems. And we think about that, we think about our roots, and we've been working together for 23 years, and we think about Marie Clay and what she taught us so long ago, right? That when we look at a student's miscues, they're windows of opportunity. That what we look at them and think, what's right about what's wrong here? What did the student try? And that's the spirit and the mindset we're trying to bring today to data, that how do we change how we're using it? How do we make it something that brings opportunity versus looking at it as a deficit and a problem?
We have the privilege of sharing our days with brilliant teachers and children every day. And we find ourselves in so many different words that people call it, whether it's a PLC or a study group or a data meeting. There's so much jargon that we have, and we come together to talk around kids. And what we've been noticing again and again is that we fall into a trap of these conversations pushing us into a deficit model. And our language starts to move us towards deficit. And we're really working hard to shift that and to think about assessment, not about what's not going well, not about what we're worried about with kids or not meeting, but instead looking at these things as opportunities to learn and to grow and to be excited and engage in the things that we care about. And when we start to shift our viewpoint and our stance, we start to take on what Marie Clay said, and we start noticing, right, what's right about what's wrong, and really looking at our students as learners and noticing, right? I think we listened and joined Joellen and Chad Everett's session today, and he talked about really watching his students and being aware of how they learn best and making sure we listen to them. And when we listen to them and we think about that and connect with them, then assessment becomes far more than a number.
He really, Chad also talked about when he shared his ideas today about, to lift a line, find a line that you love in the text. It was such a moment of, look at the data he's getting from his children right there and then he's able to use that to create a found poem. And that's what we want to remember about data, is that opportunity to have it kind of connect with a growth mindset. It can be the spark that engages kids, that builds them to work harder. And when we think about data, we want a visual to remember, because data can be done to us, and assessment can be done to us. And so this picture comes from a kindergarten teacher, and these photos help us remember the power of triangulation and the power of triangulating data. So in this kindergarten class, every week for the first 6 weeks of school, kids do a self-portrait. And you can see on the left, September 15th, Zachary did an amazing self-portrait. Clear, strong, fine motor skills, very invested in his photo. But unfortunately, a week later, when Zachary did his second photo, his second self-portrait, it doesn't look the same as the first. And so this teacher looked at these side by side, and she reminds us of what triangulation really is. Instead of making judgments and assumptions about what was wrong with Zachary, she called Zachary over and she said, Zachary, look at this. Tell me about the difference between these photos, these drawings that you did. And Zachary was clearly able to say, oh, I did my self-portrait on this date, and I handed it in a finished work bin, and I was done. And then next week, I'd already done a self-portrait. So I did it quickly. I was in the block area. It was my turn to defend the castle we had just built. So I did it as quickly as I could and ran back to blocks. And there, Zachary just explains the notion of triangulating. He was able to tell us what he understood about the assessment and what he really cared about.
And what we love about that story is it was triangulation in the sense that it was multiple data points. And it was triangulation in the sense that Zachary helped us understand this one moment in time. But by hearing his voice and by really listening to what he had to say, Zachary also told us so much more about who he is as a learner and who he's going to be in our classroom, right? Zachary told us that he's the kind of student who understands, right, what he's doing. And when he has an understanding of his purpose and the meaning of what he's doing, then he's in control of what he's going to do next. He knew he had a job to do that was important to him, and he needed to get back to the block area to defend his castle. And so we saw and understood so much about him as a learner. And as we move forward throughout that year, we wanted to make sure that we always let Zachary know why he was doing the things he was doing, and that we listened to Zachary and what was important to him, and we could trust that Zachary had a sense of agency. He understood that, and our role was going to then to be to capitalize on what he already knew in terms of teaching and learning. So we really want to begin to think about is how do we engage our students and help them understand their role in assessment. That assessment needs to be more than standards and skills and strategies. Right? Assessment needs to be about who we are. If we want to be lifelong learners, then we need to know how we learn, and we need to know how to be engaged, passionate, curious people. And in assessment, we can take that step back and really start to think about who are our learners.
And you know, when we think about that, Claire, we've been talking about it, we've been in schools for so long, and we think about like the kids that are in classrooms now, they're really used to feedback. They get feedbacks from selfies, from likes, from how many followers they get on social media. These kids get feedback from video games and what level they are and what they need to do to change that. And that feedback in their lives has a very different feeling. Kids like it, kids appreciate it, kids think about it. They make changes because of it. But yet we see a different stance in schools sometimes around feedback that we want to change a bit.
Yeah, I feel like even in my own life with my children, one of my sons is a baseball player, and he's so particular when he goes for a private lesson of who he wants, because he wants someone who's going to give him very specific feedback. He watches himself on video again and again and again, and there's no negative feelings about that. And I notice in so many aspects of our life, right, we're okay with feedback, and kids are okay with it. But what I notice in schools is teachers, right, Tam, often ask us, like, you know, is it going to hurt their feelings?
Right. Don't want to upset anybody.
Right. Like, do you want to share this data with kids? How do you think it's going to make them feel? And we really, at first we wondered, and now we've been doing it again and again. And what we're finding is the more we take a step back and slow down, as Catherine suggested this morning, and really begin to think about talking to kids about their data and their process in a way that we're really listening to them, they are far more engaged, they are far more confident, and they're really leading the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that when we get feedback, we don't want to just be told it, right? We want to ask for it. We want to be a part of the process, and we want to have the lens that we're looking at it in. And kids are the same, and we can help them to do that in school.
You know, so we wish today, like, we were going to have some magical announcement that high stakes data is going to go away. It would be a great thing to say, possibly.
We get a lot of tweets on that.
I know we do. But, you know, we don't think that's going to happen, and we don't think we have the power to change that. But we do think we have the power to redefine our stance towards assessment and feedback. We think we have the power to talk to our kids about how we view feedback, and to really make it just part of everyday life. It is not something that has to be a deficit. It can be something that's an opportunity. And the most wonderful thing about being an elementary school teacher is there's so many opportunities in an elementary classroom, because there's so much that they're learning. And if we shift that from something that's negative to something that's invigorating and powerful, we really think this can impact students, not just in school, but in every aspect of their life.
Absolutely. And I think we're thinking about, like, how do we collect that data as we're teaching? How do we watch for those moments in the classroom? How do we organize those? How do we think about it so that we capture those moments and help children to really understand, you know, what are they thinking? And how do we use that data to really engage our students?
Yeah, we want to know that we have the power to triangulate the data, and to really think about what they need to know in life, and to really start to think about and listen to our kids and what's most important to them. And, you know, with Zachary, he was one child in many, and, you know, in that particular situation, right, we didn't even notice where he was beforehand. And we know that classrooms can be a managed chaos, and we love that it's managed chaos. We think it really should be, because we think teaching and learning learning is messy. And because of that, we want to make sure we have systems and structures to help us capture those magical moments of messiness that should be happening when kids are in the zone of proximal development, right? If we're going to create spaces so kids can think and act, and those spaces need to be a place where kids can give things a go and understand that learning doesn't mean you get it right. Learning means that you really give something a go and you notice things about yourself so that we can begin to notice things about our kids and give them more and more opportunities to learn and grow.
Absolutely, and we love this sheet called the Messy Sheet, and teachers named it, and it's simply just a bunch of circles on a page. But what we find with this sheet is that as we're listening to kids and hearing their thoughts and ideas and thinking about what's next steps for them and what inspires them, we take the circle and we just write the key concept that we're seeing kids need to learn, or the strategy or skill, and then we start to put kids' names around it. And then we have this picture of our whole class. So here's an example of one from a first grade teacher who used this when she was completing her formal assessments in September. Instead of just completing each one, as she did it, she had this messy sheet right next to her. And as she noticed things, her ideas, her insights, her thoughts about children, she wrote it down. And as teachers, we tend to think in groups. We think about what we'll do whole class, what we'll do small group, what we'll do one-on-one. And so what we can do here is really think about, this sheet helps us to get a picture of our whole class just on one piece of paper.
At the same time, she's a first grade teacher in September, so she's also looking at text complexity. And what we love about what she's doing here, because we have lots of feelings around text levels. We really believe that books are leveled, not children. And in this situation, what we can see is, right, she's looking at text complexity as an instructional tool for her. Right, she's starting to think about her students and what types of texts they're ready to be introduced to. We know when something's leveled, it's leveled because it's going to introduce, right, particular new challenges to a student, while at the same time offering particular supports and scaffolds. And what we love is side by side, she's able to sort of chip away and puzzle a bit about text complexity while she's also thinking about what kinds of reading behaviors and skills and strategies that kids might want to begin thinking about as readers.
And this sheet just lets us put our ideas and thoughts right down on one piece of paper. And those words at the bottom, engagement, text, metacognition, reader response, Claire, we put those there because we wanted to remember, like, it's not just about the skills and strategies kids need, but we want to make sure we're thinking about, like, what engages them, what makes them run to school, what do they love, what are their passions, what books and authors. As Joellen was talking about today, that kids, that are mirrors for kids and windows. And metacognition, what are they thinking about? What we heard Zachary, we told that story and we knew Zachary's thinking, why he did what he did. And we want to always think about, how are kids going to respond? How are they going to show us their learning, whether it's drawing or acting or writing? Those bigger ideas we wanted to keep in mind as we use this sheet.
Yeah, we worried and we found ourselves again and again being asked to go into classrooms to teach a level B, to teach a C group, or even to teach a group based on a strategy. But what we began to notice is that there's so much more to learning than an isolated skill. Nothing in life is isolated. And what we really wanted to begin to think about together and to hold ourselves accountable to make sure that when we triangulate our data, we're also triangulating it based on who the person is. We began to really think about rigor is about who we are as much as it is about what we know, right? How we approach learning, how we approach a challenge, how we respond when the going gets rough is just as important as whatever it is that we know or are trying to know. We want to take a step back and constantly think about, how do we approach something? We want kids to think about how they approach things. We want kids to think about, what do they do when the going gets rough? How do they revise things when something isn't working the way they want? And do they take the time to slow down and reflect and think about their course?
And that what you're speaking of, there's a lot of research that backs that. And Philippa Perry, the psychoanalyst, she talked about neural pathways. And what she said was that our brains create neural pathways. And so the more we get the stories you're talking about into kids about how they tried something, they changed course, and they got strong at that skill, and that by they keep seeing themselves in that path of finding success after working hard or figuring something out after changing course, those neural pathways get built, and children begin to expect and understand that that's going to happen in learning, that that's a part of the process.
Exactly. And we want to embrace the messiness, right? As learners, as teachers, and to really be okay when kids don't know something the first time. So what we want to do now is get a child's voice into this.
Absolutely.
Whenever we can, we want to bring kids into the mix and introduce you to a student named Lexi. We got to know Lexi through a data meeting with teachers. And in this meeting, we began really thinking about her as a student. This group of first grade teachers were doing sort of taking a step back after an on-demand performance assessment for narrative writing. And they began their conversations with really looking at those on-demands and analyzing them for the crafts kids were using and the structures and the things that they were trying and employing to think about how they were going to bridge their students into their next unit of study. So while that was happening and we were really looking at narrative, what I so respect and really love about these teachers is they were triangulating, right? They didn't just have the on-demand performance. They also brought students' writing folders in, and they were looking at multiple data points. And what we found as we began to think about Lexi and to notice her, we were looking at her on-demands, and we saw that she wasn't writing as much as we would have hoped. And the voice that we heard from her day in and day out in the classroom wasn't necessarily coming onto the page, which was something that was happening for her all year. And then we went into her folder, and what we found was a treasure chest of poetry, which this class wasn't studying. The class was writing narratives.
It's just amazing that there's lots of poetry in there. You know?
I know. It was the best. So she had poem after poem after poem. So, right, we began to puzzle through. And again, teachers are always amaze us with their brilliance. We're always overwhelmed every day when we get in our cars to go home. And rather than being frustrated that she wasn't writing what she was supposed to write, right, these particular teachers took a step back and really started to think about Lexi and use this messy sheet. In the green color is what we began thinking about. Later, I'll talk about what's in blue. But I wanted to use the real sheet because they are typically messy for a reason, because our brains are all over the place. And when we think about data, we don't want it to be neat and tidy. We're supposed to be, right, we're really thinking about triangulation as digging and puzzling through and really trying to figure something out. So we noticed she had lots of poetry, and we have a question about that, right? We're noticing it and we're really wondering, like, why did she pick that structure? She went and found a particular type of paper, right? And we wanted to figure out why. We don't know why she's doing poetry, but boy, we'd love to know. We noticed, right, she had great word choice as we looked down that, and there was a real rhythm to the words she was using. We also noticed, right, some of her conventions we could help her with, right? Some of her spelling was something that in both her on-demands and in the poetry is something she could work on. We noticed in her on-demand she had lots of topics, right? She was using some of the conventions well that we taught. A lot of the crafts that we saw were there. So we saw lots of opportunities and things that she was doing. But as we took a step back and we really puzzled, this is where we left off. We wanted to know more. And what we love about assessment is we really feel like it shouldn't be something that gives us answers. We don't want to be the knowing teacher. We want to be the teacher who wants to know. And we want assessment to propel us into finding more information and to getting to know our students. So this particular teacher decided that for this next few weeks, she was really going to work with Lexi one-on-one and start to figure out, like, why poetry? Because we wanted to triangulate our data and infuse Lexi's voice. We feel like we needed to know from Lexi, right, what she was thinking and what was important to her.
And if we could get Lexi, if she's passionate about poetry, that spelling, those conventions, her stamina, that we can work on any of that in any genre. So it's so nice to see that we found, you know, when you're working with her, a passion, and now figuring out what is that exact passion, more about it, and then we can approach the strategies from her strength, and she can feel good about that.
right? So I have Lexi. Can you see the video, Tam?
No, I can't yet. I still see the small group sheet.
All right, let's see. How about now?
Still that small group sheet.
Okay.
And Lexi is in first grade, and so her smile is so endearing, but we're going to get to hear from her. Now I see you, Claire.
All right, well, let's see if I can fix that, because we don't want to see me. We want to see Lexi. How's that?
Yeah.
Did we do it?
There she is.
Right.
Well, that's not Lexi. That's her teacher, but
That's
Lexi's coming.
We're a brilliant teacher. So let's hear from Lexi.
Exactly.
Is looking at your folder. I've been learning some poetry. Pretty cool. So do you love poetry? So can you tell me, like, why? What is it about poetry? Why are you so interested in writing poetry?
It's just that I like how the poems go, like how it makes like something like go, like how it sounds like it, and how it like says like birds or stuff, words, and try and tell you word or something.
So why in a poem does it make you think more? I agree with you. It does, but it's an interesting way to say it.
I don't really know, but I just like it that way. I don't know.
So you like when it sounds the way it's supposed to sound?
Yeah.
And when it sort of describes it? It doesn't just tell you? Is that what I'm hearing you say? So can you show me one in your poem where you feel like you did that? So can you read it to me? Right, in her face in that moment, to us, right, is worth 1,000 words, right? Her sense of pride that we slowed down to hear from her and hear her poem. And then we want to really let her have that time to reflect on herself and hear from her what was important to her about her poetry and what she was thinking in that moment. Describing them so that your reader has to guess. That's pretty cool. And a lot of your poems have been like that, right? So what I'm wondering is, as a writer, are you interested in sticking with writing poetry, or are you thinking of making a change in terms of what you're going to write next?
I was thinking of like making different changes.
So you want to keep writing poetry, or do you want to write a different kind of writing? Okay, so you're feeling like you've done everything you want to do with poetry, because we could look at different types of poems, and you could keep writing poetry, but maybe try something different, or you could try using descriptive words, but in a different type of writing, like in an all about, or an opinion, or a story.
I think if I can move on if I like it. If I don't like it, then I'll move back to it.
So you're thinking of trying a different kind of writing? So what kind of writing are you thinking about? Like all about, opinion, or like small moment? So which one do you want to try next if you're going to switch from poems?
I think all about.
You want to try all about? Why? And what we love in that piece is, right, already she has that growth mindset, right? I'm going to give this a go, and if it doesn't work, I'll try something different. Listening to her, I'm struggling in that moment because she's saying she wants something else, but she's also saying her heart is still in poetry. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to bridge her from a passion that she has in poetry and introduce her to a next step. Because although she's saying she wants all about, she's also telling me I'm always thinking about poetry, which is just so curious. And what we're learning about her, right, beyond what type of writing and about her in terms of craft, is she's the kind of learner who kind of studies things on her own, right? She found this by herself, and she's someone who just kind of fell into this interest and this passion and took it on. So I'm also noticing who she is as a learner, and I'm wondering that if I give her another tool, right, or scaffold her in a way that allows her the time and the space to sort of figure this out and find her voice, that might match kind of the how she learns. So there are those moments where you're just really lucky as a teacher, and this was one of those moments because I happened to have a book with me that I thought would be the perfect tool to kind of bridge her to where she wanted to go next and give her the space that I think she needed to kind of think about it herself. But as again, I want to give her the choice. She's the one who needs to think about this goal. So I want to ask her and hear what she thinks. Can you show you? I have a couple of things. With this writer, is writing both information and poems. And so they give us some information here, and then they write a poem about it. Right? There's a poem about it, and then some information. So it's almost like all about poetry book. Where in every time they write about something, so you would almost have like a poem about a rabbit, all about rabbits. A poem about a dog, all about dogs. You could try something like that. What do you think of that idea? You kind of bring them both together. Would you like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to use this book as a mentor text?
Yeah.
And keep it in your writing folder, and you could try to do that?
Yeah.
And right there, her smile tells us everything.
I know, it does.
She was so excited to have a way to combine those both. And when I keep watching that video, I just keep noticing the options you give her, and those choices I thought made a big difference in her being able to make her own choice. You know, by having kind of a menu of choices, it really helped her to think through that together.
But what really helped me was giving her the space, right? And I heard again and again this morning, right? We both kept tweeting each other back and forth, instant messaging about space, right? And it's that space that gives them the time to act, but it gives us the time to watch and to listen. And by giving myself that time, right, what I thought was rhythm in her mind was word choice. When I wasn't sure of why, I learned from her that it's just a passion and she doesn't know why, but she just thinks about poetry all the time, and there's engagement, right? I want her to know and to keep thinking about, and I love that discovery, like, well, I could write all about rabbits, right? She's starting to learn that you could have a passion and know something, and you can still explore that across different genres. And she's starting to see that. And I can show her, if she's someone who loves word choice, how word choice, right, is also really important in an all about in her informational text. I also saw that Lexi knows a lot instinctively. And if I can start to tell her the names for that, like what readers and writers call that, she's going to be able to have that sort of metacognition and start to be able to talk more and be more articulate about what she's doing and why she's doing it. And that's only going to help her as she learns and grows.
Yeah, that whole piece of metacognition and naming it was so important for her, because you're right, a lot of it is intuitive. It's just her passion. She doesn't know why she's doing it. She doesn't know what the name is to call it word choice. But that's what she's thinking about.
She really is. And what we've been thinking a lot about is like, how do we involve them in that process?
Right, absolutely. And we want to really involve them beyond standards, beyond benchmarks and rubrics. It's not that those tools aren't important, but they're tools. But with Lexi, you could see we're able to reach more benchmarks and standards because we have her passion with us, and we know what she cares about. And so to speak, we can go in the back door with some of those skills that she's going to need, because she's going to want people to be able to read her poetry, and she's going to want people to be able to read her informational books. And we can help her with that, but we're building from her strength and from her passion.
And so what we really want to think about is like, how do we build assessment literacy? We go back to Zachary. He didn't know what we were doing and what our purpose was. So right in this slide, and Tammy, you're on the PowerPoint now?
Yes, I am.
We really want to make sure that our students know, like, what is it we're doing? They need to have meaningful and understanding and authentic understanding of what assessment is and what its role is, day in and day out, in life and in classrooms. They need to know why we're listening. They need to know there's a range of ways in which we observe and get to know them. And they need to know that it's not just about a high stakes test. An assessment and data just isn't about a window during the year, right? Every single day when we stop and we slow down and we get to know the people around us, that's assessment and that's data. And we have the power to do that. And Tim, you had talked about Philippa Perry and that neural pathway, right? I'm really thinking about the ability to hear things in a positive way. And there's so much research around feedback and the importance of feedback.
Yeah, absolutely, John. Hattie talks about the power of feedback, and not just teachers giving feedback, but kids giving feedback to teachers and kids giving feedback to themselves. And we think that kids have to learn, the steps in doing that and how to give that to themselves and being a part of it versus having it done to them.
Yeah, and just a shout out to Christine Mraz and Christine Herds and their book, A Mindset for Learning. We think there's so much of what we're talking about. They really bring to life in how they're doing this in the classroom. And we want to make sure that data is part of that mindset and how kids are going to think about that. We also really believe in the research that talks about if learners know what they're learning, why they're learning it, and how it's going to help them, understanding goes up by 85%. It's research we can't ignore. And we feel like when we're modeling strategies, everyone's kind of taken on that research. But when it comes to assessment, we don't feel like people have embraced that research in the same way. We think kids need to know that when we write something down, it's not because there's something wrong. We notice again and again, when we write things, kids stop in their tracks because they think they're wrong. When we ask them, why do you think that? They falter because they think they're wrong. And that worries us.
Yeah, we want to make sure that they're seeing that learning is a part of just collecting information, that when we learn, we watch, we notice, we think, and sometimes we're going to collect information, and sometimes they're going to collect information, and we want them to know that teaching is when we collect information. And I love this graphic you created, Claire, because we took that cycle of assessment, analyze, and question and added teaching to it. And in teaching, we're listening, we're watching. When Jan and Kim were talking about who's doing more of the work, right? When we're teaching, we're also listening and noticing and being aware of things and recording that information. And then that's fueling our instruction later.
Yeah, because that zone of proximal development, right? That time when we're creating and guarding space for them to act and to think and to learn, right? Terry Thompson in his book also talks about that's the same time that we should be surveying. And when we begin to think about the zone of proximal development and the gradual release of responsibility, right? Triangulating needs to include teaching. We need to remember, right? Joellen said today that children are our curriculum, right? That we need to remember that they're at the center of everything we're doing. And there's nothing more powerful in teaching than taking careful notice of our students as learners and, most importantly, as people, right? They really need to, we need to think about who are they and what makes them tick. And when we think about teaching and learning, we really think about like 3 big ideas that we kind of boil it down to.
Yeah, we're really thinking about what am I trying to learn? We want kids to have that question in their hearts. What am I trying to learn? So that, because we know no matter what you're trying to do, whether it's snowboarding or ice skating or math or reading or dieting or exercise, you have to know what you're trying to get better at in order to get better at it. And so we want kids to ponder, what am I trying to learn? And that's what we saw Lexi do. And she was thinking about, what am I doing next? And then she thought, how am I doing it right now? Sometimes we need a moment with kids to say, so we're in the midst of learning this, how's it going for me? And we want them to be able to reflect on that and make changes in their course of where they're going.
Yeah, we love the research by Sarah Lewis in The Rise, and she talks about not trying to be perfect, but instead teaching kids how to fail successfully. What a great idea, that we need to fail successfully, right? That we're propelled by the near win, that people who almost get something and then are propelled and actually become more creative, more resilient, and more motivated. And we really want to teach kids how to embrace that and to see that as like, so how am I doing right now?
Right, and then we want them to look at that and say, okay, so what are my next steps? And where can I go from here? And feel that they have a path and that they're part of creating that path so that they really understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. It all goes back to that purpose. And so
go ahead, Tam, you want to talk about what we're going to see next?
Yeah, so we're going to look a little bit at some data for 3 boys in 5th grade right now, Sean, Tristan, and Shay. And these 3 boys are right in this midst of learning. They're kind of in that state of how am I doing right now? And so these boys in 5th grade are in book clubs and they're loving them. Their book clubs are about graphic novels, and they've been reading. And what the teacher noticed is, boy, when these boys are talking about their thinking, their engagement is high, their thoughts and ideas, they have lots of them. But when you open their notebooks and you expect to see how they've recorded those ideas, it's not there, that they're not stopping and jotting independently. And we want to move kids so that they're able to do that work so that their writing can also reflect their deep thinking. So we wanted to meet with these boys and talk a bit about where they are in this process and help them to see that when you reflect and you make some changes, it's okay. That's part of the learning process.
So I'm going to bring that video up. Just let me know when you can see it.
Okay. There it is.
All right. And we'll introduce these, get to know these boys a bit?
Yes.
All right, here we go.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Good. So we pulled you together because you're all in different book clubs, although you guys are reading One Dead Spy, and you're reading
Like you want to.
Okay, great. Both great books, but different, right? Both graphic novels, so your class is studying graphic novels. I wanted to hear, we brought a group together to talk a little bit about your reading notebooks, right? And how it's going when you're sitting by yourself and you have to take notes, right? And how that's going for you. I know in Read Aloud that can go pretty well, but in this kind of group that might be tricky. So can you guys talk about that? And you talk about that, like what's working well and what's tricky, and we'll come up with some new ideas today. Okay.
What's good for me is I try to use quotes
Okay.
in the book, and I try to explain what the author
Okay.
Sometimes when I do explanation evidence, it doesn't support my opinion. It doesn't fully go with it.
So you're trying to write more quotes
Yeah.
down. Can you show me a page in your notebook where you're doing that? Show each other pages in your notebooks where it's going well, or sometimes it's not going well, and that's okay. We can try some new ideas, right?
Yeah,
So show me what you
I'm
got
trying to
here.
get like more stuff
Like
and
I
dots
wrote
down.
some there's like a word. I mean, like he lied about dodgeball.
Uh-huh.
Dude, you think at this because like all his friends, he said that I was the best dodgeball player ever. I was the champion,
Mm-hmm.
and like they're finding out how he's so bad at it.
Right. It sounds like you've gotten some good quotes here, and then does it hard to continue? That's what I find. Like I can start well, and then it's a little bit hard to continue. Yeah, you can see it here. Let's listen in and see what's working well and what's a little bit tricky.
And this boy in the black t-shirt, what he starts to share out is that, yes, I'm having trouble taking the notes, but I'm having trouble organizing the notes. And his talk about that really helps the boy in the red t-shirt to look at his notes and share out what's happening for him. And we think this sharing of what's going on it helps kids to reflect.
How about for yourself?
Yeah, I'm also trying to get more stuff and dots and stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And more specific evidence.
Yeah, and so when that happens, it's okay. And there's a lot of technology that can help us. So can I show you an app that helps me do this? Okay. So this is an app. And can you lean into my iPad for a minute? And let's see what we think. Okay, there's lots of tools to use. This is just one. Okay. This is an app called Padlet. And what you can do in Padlet is with your other book club members, so let's just say you're partners and you find a partner in your book club, right? You can type in Padlet and all add notes. Instead of just being the only person adding the quotes or the notes, everyone in your group can add to the same board.
Oh.
Right? So like, look at what I did. I
Love that.
I know, right? And you continue to show them, right, and teach them. But ultimately, again, right, they need to be the ones to be involved in setting that goal and deciding, like, what's their next step as a learner. So after you show them, you then give them, right, the choice.
Yeah, that might
help, or
yeah,
not
that'd
help?
be pretty helpful.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right, so we're thinking this might help. Let's at least give it a go, and if it doesn't help, or not. So in order.
And we want them right there to really know that, it's okay if it doesn't work. Like there's lots of ways to do it, but let's alter our action plan a bit, make a different plan, and then we can move on. I think that's a big part of us trying to build this mindset of looking at data in a positive light.
Right, exactly, because ultimately we know, like, they have to control their own learning, right? And it may not work, but they were sure excited, right, to give it a try. And once you own something, at least we know for ourselves that really matters for kids. Absolutely.
Right, it's so important that the children are a big part of the process with data, and I think that it's that what you said is that taking ownership, having agency over it, so that they can make their own decisions.
So I think what we hope, right, is that at the end of the day, that assessment is our window, right? If we are going to create the space that we know kids need to learn. Learning is messy. It's not about checking something off the list. It's not about putting it on the board and knowing that it's going to be done today. If it's worthy of our time and teaching it, then we know it's worthy of giving kids time to own it and understand it. And during that time that we're creating space for them to construct their knowledge, then we know that we have the time and space to listen, to observe, and to connect with them and help them connect not only to the standards and the skills, but to connect to who they are and how they learn and who they want to be. Because as Catherine reminded us, like, we're raising, right, humans. We're raising literate humans who we want to act and act with love and to act with voice. Ryan, do you want to, are we at our point where we are?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off or anything.
No worries.
No worries.
I've really been enjoying the presentation from behind that screen. But yeah, I just thought I'd quickly just first thank you, but also I wanted to show you some of the feedback you were getting on Twitter. Well, I shouldn't have been shocked because it really was a good presentation, but people really have enjoyed what you've been saying. So just to show you quickly, I think one of the themes that really resonated was this idea of really just communicating with students, and you can see that in these tweets. But I think it's so easy, and this is kind of what you were saying at the beginning, I think it's so easy that as teachers just to look at data as kind of this thing that's kind of dead on the page. But the reason everyone's appreciating, I think, what you were saying about talking to students is it helps us to see data in a new light. And it's nothing that we can't do, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate your kind of giving us some strategies into how to do that. And also for me, and I know for people that were watching too, based on what I was seeing, is seeing those two videos with the two of you actually working with students made it so much more real, like seeing it happen and seeing the faces on the students. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And I know everyone else that was watching does too.
Yeah, students just bring things to life, and they really help us learn how to do things that are meaningful to them.
Yeah, well, I really thank you so much for doing this. And I hope to work with you again in the future.
We hope so too.
Thank you.
Okay.
So what I want to do is I'm just going to show everyone now information about the closing keynote that I hope you'll attend. So here is just some information about that so you could see. So the closing session will be at 3, so you have about 10 minutes or so. And it'll be by the International Literacy Association. Young Educators Are Changing the World, a conversation with ILA's 30 under 30 honorees. So I look forward to seeing everyone there. I'm definitely going to attend. And again, I just want to remind you, as you can see at the bottom, our chosen charity for this event is CASA. So just keep them in mind because all of this has been for free today. So thank you again for doing this, and have a great day, and we'll work with you again in the future.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye.
We did it.